So what we're talking about today is how to support an ADHD loved one. And so this is where you can invite your family and friends. And also, we do this call every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern. And so you are welcome to be on this more. You don't have to be in real estate. You don't have to be an entrepreneur. This is a free education call. So if it's helpful, you're welcome to be on here. My name is Tyler Elstrom. I am a ADHD executive coach for entrepreneurs and real estate agents. I have been in the real estate industry for about 14 years now, ran a team that was in the top 100 in the world, and then moved into coaching full time about 8 years ago. I have a mental health background as well. I worked in clinical and I have ADHD myself. I've worked with ADHD coaches and I've studied it. And so this is my passion. So thank you. Thank you for being here. And so when we're talking about supporting an ADHD loved one, there's a couple different elements that we want to look at because one, we want to be educated and understand what is ADHD and what's going on with the brain. Because if you don't know what it is or what the biological backing is, sometimes it can look like an excuse, or maybe somebody's lazy, or they're just forgetful or something, right? If you don't experience ADHD and your brain doesn't operate the same way, sometimes like anyone, even without ADHD, might experience forgetting stuff or maybe not making a priority or something like that. And so sometimes that stuff, the ADHD traits can appear like they might for you, coming from a lack of caring, a lack of making a priority, just, not caring or being careless. And what's really happening is a totally different operating system with how our brains work. And it's really important to understand that so you don't take it personal if you're in that boat where sometimes you might get resentful. You might feel like maybe it's personal just because you only have your own point of reference, right? So it's really important to understand the brain and what's happening. And then also another element that's important is to understand where your boundaries are, because we don't want a spouse or a friend or a family member or somebody or a roommate to get burned out if you're overcompensating and taking over some of the stuff for us. Or, if somebody's not actively working on ADHD, the traits that are hard, because there's incredible traits that are amazing, which is why you're here, because you love your ADHD person, right? But there are also just these wonderful things. And then there's some things that might be harder. And so we want to make sure that you, as a person supporting your loved one, that you also have boundaries and you also know where your limit is. And it might be that you just let certain things go at a certain point. For example, like if we have trouble feeding ourselves, right? We have trouble cooking and you're tired, maybe you just let us suffer the natural consequence of being hungry, right? Or we forget something because our what's called our executive function can kind of ebb and flow. And so as a person supporting an ADHD loved one, you just need to figure out where your boundaries are. And this is with all relationships, even somebody without ADHD, right? Everybody's comes in and has things that are incredible about them and have some things that might be a little bit more impairing. And so it's not that much different, but there are specific things that might show up. So one is, right, understanding what's going on, understanding the brain. Two is understanding what your limits are, what your expectations are. And those are really like some of the big components. And number three is just enjoying that relationship, because ADHD people are super loyal, like really fun, creative, can bring a lot of energy and adventure, great entrepreneurs, deeply empathetic, great humor. Like there's so many amazing qualities in an ADHD person. So that's part three, is just to enjoy that. So let's start out with quick, like, what is ADHD? And so there's a lot of myths going around. So really this is over 87%. Some people say over 93% genetic. And this is in utero. This is not a lack of discipline. This is not caring, like we said. And I'm going to do a screen share here. So one of the important things to understand, there's two concepts of this, is there's four different parts of the brain: the limbic system, the frontal lobe, the reticular activating system, and the basal ganglia. And these are all affected or a little bit different in ADHD. And this is in utero. Right. So our frontal lobe and different things in our brain might be a different volume, a different size. Doesn't mean smarter or less intelligent. It could be we're less risk averse. So we could do it. We might be a little bit more impulsive though. However, we might be more creative, right? So there's some cool things. And so the frontal lobe is part of the brain that helps to organize and plan and focus, problem solve, make decisions, control impulses, manage emotions, perceive time, delay gratification. This is a pretty big one that we experience. And then The limbic system can regulate emotion. So if your person has big feelings, or is restless, or maybe kind of some ups and downs, that's the limbic system. The basal ganglia, that regulates communication. So this can cause a little bit more impulsivity, or maybe being a little bit less, I guess, inattention, right? And then the reticular activating system. And so this is a really core element of ADHD, which is the dopamine, how dopamine's regulated. And dopamine is really the chemical, the happy chemical, the chemical that helps us focus, that helps us like feel calm, regulated, organize, prioritize, all of these elements, right? So we have four parts of the brain that are affected. And then the other thing I want to tell you about is what's called our executive function. So if you, and this is the brain, and so dopamine is a lot of things that feed into this. And so the reason that I want to share those two things is because if a partner doesn't understand about ADHD or what it is, what can happen is you might take things personally, right? Because you only have your own point of reference. And so and dopamine is a big piece in this. And so this is the brain, and these blue arrows or pathways are dopamine pathways. Okay. And so if you do not have ADHD, how motivation works in the brain, or getting things done, what happens for you is, let's say you want to get something done. Let's say you want to clean out the garage or organize the garage, right? So your brain sends dopamine, it starts producing dopamine, and it sends what ends up being a surplus to your frontal lobe, right? This is one of the parts affected with ADHD. When there's a surplus, and that's the happy chemical that says go and makes us do things, then the brain says, hey, here's a bunch of dopamine, and go start that project in the garage, and we're going to give you a little bit more. And then as you keep going, we're going to get a little bit more, and continually all throughout. And then at the end, when you're done, we're going to give you more, right? So that's how motivation works in a non-ADHD brain. Dopamine is the fuel. It's like the gas to go. In an ADHD brain, what they found is that same pathways, however, there's typically not a surplus. So there's no fuel in the car to go, or there's a limited fuel. So we have to use like raw willpower, raw discipline, or sometimes we can't. And sometimes the only way to make us do that, raw discipline, raw willpower, is like to beat ourselves up, to like say negative things, to create stress, which then can create cortisol, like stress hormone, and dopamine, and then it finally happens. So if you have a partner or a loved one that you've asked them to do something and they don't do it till the last minute, there's literally no fuel in the car until it gets very urgent, and it creates stress, and it manufactures dopamine. So a lot of times we don't have a surplus of dopamine, or it's on a delay. So once we start, but we don't have the fuel to get there. So it's like, I'm in Asheville, North Carolina, right? And so it's like I need to drive to Zimby, like let's say the Chapel Hill, like the Tar Heels. Anybody know the sports team, right? UNC Chapel Hill. It's a pretty big team. So let's say I have to drive to Chapel Hill, which is about 3.5 hours. And it's like, well, there's no fuel in the car, but you'll get fuel once you get halfway. And it's like, well, how do I get halfway? I don't know. Good luck. And if you don't make it, we're going to get mad at you. Right? Like that's what it can feel like. And then we beat ourselves up. Right. And then we squeeze tiny little drops of dopamine out. So a lot of times we don't get a surplus. However, there are 5 different situations where we actually may get a huge surplus. So most of the time we may not get a surplus unless it falls under 5 things. And this is something they showed on studies, is if that thing falls in one of these 5 categories, which is interesting, new, challenging, urgent, or passion. This is called INCUP. If it's interesting, new, challenging, urgent, or a passion. Right. So let's say you want your partner or your spouse or your friend to go help you with help do the laundry while you're gone, and it feels impossible, right? But then how can they go like play golf? Like that sounds horrible, right? You couldn't do this one thing for me, but you can do this. Well, if golf is a huge passion, a huge special interest, all of a sudden we get dopamine. But if the laundry is not interesting, it's not new, it's not challenging, it's not urgent, unless there's a deadline, it's going to be a lot harder for us to do it. And so without understanding what's going on in the brain, sometimes we can take that personally. And the reason that our dopamine is regulated differently, as they're finding, is there's a genetic advantage to it. So we stay calm under pressure. So what you'll find, if you were to go to the hospital and take a little clipboard and start interviewing all the emergency care workers and asking if they had ADHD or not, you'd find most of them likely do. If you went to performers, high level sports athletes, entrepreneurs, a lot of like multimillionaires, you'll find that a lot of them have ADHD. It's the ones that work in stress or high pressure situations because our dopamine levels are so low. And when we get into higher pressures, higher stress situations, or there's a deadline, or you're mad at us, all of a sudden now the brain gives us dopamine and we can do the thing. And so there's a lot of components to this that they can take all the way back to like hunter-gatherer times because it's genetic. And there are certain African villages and tribes that are isolated that have prevalence of ADHD and ones that don't. And they found over and over again that the ones that have ADHD in the gene pool thrive over the ones that don't. However, we're going to struggle with some of the mundane tasks and our brain's just not going to light up. So that's one core concept that's really important, I feel like, to share to understand what's going on. Um, and we don't want to just say, well, this is all of your ADHD, so I don't have any expectations of you, right? So I'm going to give you an analogy of one of my favorite ones is like, how do you know if somebody's using ADHD as an excuse? Because this is important as well. We want to have compassion. We want to be educated. And like I said, we want that pressure. We want that stress. We want that last minute, not stress, but just accountability because it creates that dopamine. And so it's important to hold us accountable for stuff, just like any partner, right? If you need help. And so that's really important, right? And so how do you know if it's an excuse or not? So this is my favorite analogy. If I was, let's say I was 5'5" and there was a shelf and it was 9 feet, it was up 9 feet, and you said, "Hey, Tyler, let's say yeah, you were, well, I hope let's say you're my family member, right? Or a loved one." And you say, "Hey, you're 5'5". I need you to grab something off that shelf." And I reach and I can't reach it. I say, "I can't get it. I'm sorry." And I walk away. Well, that would be kind of using excuse, right? But if I said, "Hey, I can get that thing, but I need to get a step ladder and then I'll get it for you." That's what's called using an accommodation. And so the majority of our population does not have ADHD, right? People with ADHD is about 3 to 8% of the population. So our world is not built for ADHD. There's still a lot of new studies around that. And so getting accommodations in place to adapt to a world that's not built for the minority, which makes sense, is going to be really important. That's going to be really important. And so we want those accommodations. We want to do that. And so I want to talk to you about how you can help that. So I talked a little bit about INCUP a second ago, right? And so these are ways because that you can help people get stuff done, right? And so the model is called INCUP. So the first one is interesting, right? And then we have new, challenging, urgent, and passion. And so in the brain scans for ADHD, they introduced different stimulus to ADHD brains and non-ADHD brains. And they found that, again, a non-ADHD brain is going to light up more consistently and for longer to majority of stimulus, whereas an ADHD brain is going to be way less lit up and not respond to it and sometimes not engage. And that's the frontal lobe. Unless you introduce these five things, and then all of a sudden what happens is an ADHD brain is going to light up stronger and longer than a non-ADHD person if you can fit it into these five things. And so something interesting. And so the notes here, these are for like a business owner, which can do that. But again, if we can make things interesting, if we can make them new. So if they're allowed to listen to a podcast while they do stuff or music, or maybe just talk about an interesting conversation, all of a sudden that might be easier. If it's new, if there's a new way to do stuff, if there's any way that it can be new, something about that creates dopamine within us, and it can be a lot interesting. But if something can be new or made new or done a different way, challenging. So this is another one, is, hey, if you could say, "Hey, if you get this done by this time, we'll go on a date night, we'll do an extra fun thing," or something like that, right? If you can make it a challenge, I mean, sometimes I'll set a timer and see if I can beat the clock. This is a real thing that we do for ourselves. Or maybe you set a challenge together. Maybe you both have a goal together that you're going to do certain things around the house and do five of them and have a visual around that with stickers or something on the fridge. Like that kind of stuff that we can see visually is really helpful for us. So something challenging, something gamified, urgent. So this is one of the best, most important things you can do for your ADHD partner, is what's called body doubling. So body doubling or body mirroring is a technique that works for almost every ADHDer. Is the concept is that if someone's there with you, it creates urgency and it creates us being present in the moment. And it can help us get stuff done. So for example, let's take that garage, right? So what would be harder with a ADHD partner if you said, hey, can you clean this garage out, this week? Right? Like, or sometime this month. There's not really a deadline. There's not a lot of urgency. And our dopamine, unless it's interesting, new, challenging, urgent, or passion, is probably not going to flow. Whereas with body doubling, it's like, hey, let's clean the garage out tonight, and I'm going to sit with you and let's talk while you do it. So if you're with somebody, it creates the urgency for sitting with them. The other thing with our executive dysfunction and that frontal lobe is we can have trouble prioritizing or organizing. So you can probably see all the tabs I have open. This is nothing compared to what happens, but that's like our brain, right? We can have all these tabs open at the top. And so with ADHD, it can be a lot harder for us to see one step at a time or to even see what order it should be in. And so take the example for cleaning out the garage. If you can sit with us and hang out and say, okay, let's grab all the trash first, you know, and help us figure out what the list is or encourage us to make a list, that could be really helpful. So let's take all the trash out first, or let's why don't we make a pile right there of all the stuff we're going to sell or put on Facebook Marketplace. You would be blown away at how helpful that is to just have the step and right there, so that concept of body doubling, taxes, something just sitting next to us can be really helpful as well. And then passion, the piece of passion is, if you can pair it with something fun, like a lot of people, they'll fold laundry and they'll put on a show they like, something with that, because again, we're operating with less fuel. However, we can sell some houses, right? Or we can be an entrepreneur. So it's unless there's pressure, it's hard, can be. So yeah, passion pairing it with a hobby, something fun. And I want to say this too. So if you're a partner and it's like, well, aren't I interesting? Aren't they passionate about me? Yes, absolutely. So don't take offense. To if for some reason it doesn't feel like a priority, because what can happen sometimes is we can get very burned out and we have just a limited amount of fuel for the basics, like feeding ourselves. Like if we're really taxed and we're doing all of these things that are really difficult and we only have a certain amount of dopamine for the day, it might be that we get to the point where we get home and it's like an empty gas tank and we can hardly put our clothes away and we can hardly just even regulate our emotions, right? And so what is really helpful is for you to know how much shame a lot of people with ADHD have, because studies show that we have been told on average 20,000 more negative messages about our behavior by the age of 8. So an ADHD kid has been told 20,000 more times by the age of 8 how we forgot stuff, what's wrong with us, why can't we focus, why'd you forget this, right? Why are you restless? Sit still. And so a lot of us have like self-worth stuff unless they've done the work on that, and a lot of shame. And so and it's, again, we do what's called masking. So especially if your person just recently got diagnosed, you might say, hey, why did this get harder? We've always had ADHD. Why did this get worse? That can be a thing too. Well, it's because we've been like hiding our traits for our whole life and we finally have a name for it. And we're just tired, we're just tired. So we're tired of pretending because we might be numbed out or zoned out, because we've just been holding it in for so long. So that shame can happen. And so what's so helpful and does create dopamine is pointing out what we've done right. So even if it's small, like, oh my gosh, thank you for getting that done, or that meant so much to me, and also saying what you do want versus what you don't want. So for example, let's say you haven't gone on a date night in a while, right? you say, hey, we never go on date nights, and I feel like you don't care about me, and I don't know, I'm having a hard time, right? Which is valid. That's okay to say. It can create a lot of shame in an ADHD person, and we want your needs met too. So instead, if you say, oh my gosh, the last date night we had, I had such a blast with you, and I really want to be close to you, and I would love to do that this week. Like, could we do that Tuesday? I really want to spend some time with you. Like, you mean a lot to me. Like, that's going to, and it's like, or hey, you're so good at planning dates. Could we do one this week? And could you plan it? And could you, could we do it this time? Or could you tell me what it is by this time and you give us a deadline? You'll have probably a great date planned. And so remember, we're already operating a lot of us on a certain level of shame. And if you're dumping more on, it can just almost like bury us. So that's a thing that can happen as well. The other thing, a couple other elements that are important to understand is our working memory. So this is another one is our working memory is different. So working memory is the ability to hold like short-term things, multiple things at one time. This isn't a long-term memory. So our working memory is going to be different. Whereas if you say, hey, can you, when you go out at the store, can you grab, some milk and some bread, and on the way back, can you pick up the prescription and the dry cleaning, right? Unless we write that down, we very likely might forget something in that, and it's not because we don't care. Our brains don't work the same as you. It's because our working memory is impaired. And it can almost hold one thing at a time. Now, working memory, they have tied to higher intelligence levels. So the way that our brain prunes information and data, it's automatic. So we will prune the urgent stuff. That's why we're great emergency workers and surgeons and like sports athletes. It's in the moment, right? But we don't always remember those softer things that aren't right now or on fire. And so a list is helpful, even texting, because then we can look at it. That's really helpful as well. And so just telling somebody three things that they need to do later on, unless they write it down, and that's on us. We need to write it down. We need to do accommodations for ourselves because we want to pull this responsibility off of you, right? This is just if you want to help and point stuff out. But writing stuff down is like our best friend because it's a lie we tell ourselves, oh, I'll remember that. No, we got to write that down. And so that working memory, it's not that we don't care. It's not that it's on a priority. The brain just literally like prunes it out of the way. Dry cleaning, is that urgent? Is that on fire? No, I'll remember that because I'm doing that later. It's fine. Right? So that can happen as well. And so just understand the working memory. It can also show up as like us not knowing why we walked in a room, So we might go in a room to do, we might go put a load of laundry in or something. And then on the way there, we find our old high school yearbook that's sitting out. And then we open that. It's like, man, I wonder what that person's doing. Like, let me check Facebook. And we look at them and it's like all of a sudden we can't see anything else, right? It's the extreme. Like there's all this dopamine because it's interesting. It's new. And then we look them up on Facebook and then we start watching something on YouTube that remind of, and then it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't even put the laundry in time and now your clothes aren't dry, And so again, we feel a lot of shame around this. I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody, but we can if you've witnessed that. And so also like support is really helpful. And it's actually going to make us be less hard on ourselves. And overall, we're going to have higher executive function. So think of that fuel tank that we have every day, right? That we use to do the stuff that's hard. Now, we also use it to regulate our emotions. So if we're in a household around people that are constantly criticizing us, or we feel like we're falling short, or we feel like we're failing, we're going to have to use some of that fuel to regulate our emotions and our mood so we don't crash. And then we're going to have less fuel at the end of the day. And it's just this like snowball effect. So if a partner is really highly critical, which I doubt anybody on here is, but this is important to share. If somebody's highly critical, it can actually make our executive function worse. Whereas if you say, hey, thank you so much for grabbing that stuff, for me, or, I love your humor. I love spending time with you, or you're so passionate, just, things that you can point out to help us counteract all of those negative messages that we got our whole life. If when you're our safe space, oh my gosh, we'll do anything for you, So the other thing that's important to understand is what's called time blindness. So this is another aspect of it. And so time blindness. And so this is part of our brain too. So for us with ADHD, we see time as now or not now. Like that's how our brain works, now or not now, which can make us incredibly present, right? However, let's say there's something you want us to remember. If it's not happening today or right now, and we don't write it down or put it on our calendar, it's probably gone. Like that's a thing. So if you say, hey, on Wednesday, we're gonna go over to the in-laws' house, that evening, and you tell us once, and or maybe it's like in a month, we're probably not going to remember it. So again, we need to write it down, or you may choose to remind us. But again, it's not because we don't care. It's just how our brain works. And so if you find though that you are taking on a lot, or you feel like, because we don't want a partner to get burned out, if you feel like you're taking on a lot, then that's where it's really important for you to know what your limits are. And then also to encourage us to write it down, right? Or use accommodations. So we don't want you to get tired. We don't want you to get burned out. Because that also can be a thing if you're over caretaking, right? If you're doing too much, then that is not good, right? And so yeah, and I will say like there are some incredible marriages and partnerships with an ADHD person and non-ADHD person because you bring two different skills to the table. So there's a lot of great stuff too. And I could talk about that. I just what I want to say is you probably want some help with the harder parts. That's probably the part that needs that. And so then also another thing I want to say is what's called demand avoidance. So this is something that a lot of people with ADHD have. It's called demand avoidance. This is a thing, and it's like anxiety or overwhelm when there's demands. And so, especially if your partner's in real estate or your friend's in real estate and they're getting texts all the time and there's all these demands, and then you come in and say, hey, can you do this thing for me? Hey, I need you to do this, but it's like kind of a command. There can be an immediate like freeze up tenseness in our nervous system that can happen. And so just be aware of that sometimes the way you say stuff can affect things as well. Whereas if you were to say, and some of that's back to our childhood of having to overfunction and be so, I mean, a lot of us can be like chronically burned out until we get a diagnosis, and a lot of us don't get a diagnosis till an adult. We're like chronically burned out of just doing these things and not having dopamine, right? We've been pushing the car down the road without fuel for years and years and years, trying to hide it and pretend we're not. And so when someone comes in and that, hey, I need you to do this by this, it can feel like another demand. And we can tense up because that's happened our whole life, and we can't regulate. It means more anxiety. Whereas if you say, hey, what day could you have this done, or what time could you have this done? And there's a tiny bit of option for a lot of people that can alleviate that demand avoidance. So it's like, and then also just hearing how it makes you feel. So your person's going to care about you. So let's say, they need to schedule a doctor appointment and they've been putting it off over and over. It's like, hey, can I talk to you? I'm feeling a lot of anxiety and worry about us not having a doctor appointment. And here's how it's affecting me. When could you do that by? You know, like that's going to go over better than, hey, come on, you got to schedule that. Let's go. Right. Because again, yes, maybe that creates like cortisol and stress hormones, but now we're going to have to regulate and it's going to be more stressful for us. So yeah, so just again, and then reminders like supporting, recognizing and celebrating the strengths, the things that are good. Point out the things we probably can't hear it enough of the things that are good about us because we've spent so much of our life hearing about the things that aren't. So the more you can point out the good things, the more happy we're going to be, probably, especially if our main person, as well. And then also I'll say, last if it's time sensitive need, yes. So somebody just did that in the chat. What if it's time sensitive need? Absolutely. I mean, you don't have to tiptoe, right? Just be yourself. But if there's a time sensitive need, and then that's already going to create dopamine for us as well. So yeah, I would say, and feel free to write in the chat what that might be because it can depend on the situation. But yeah, ask for what you need. Advocate for what you need as a partner, and then also like understand how valuable it is for us to know what we're doing right. A lot of us can have an intense fear of rejection, of being too much, of being too loud, of not being mature, like all of these things we've heard our whole lives. And so when you can be a supportive person with boundaries, right, and create this like environment where we can be ourselves and not feel judged and be appreciated, you're going to see I mean, we also have the ability to have this motor that doesn't quiet, it doesn't slow down. We might do all kinds of stuff where you're like, how do you have this much energy? How can you do all this? Thank you for doing all of this for our family. So when an ADHD person is in a harder environment, their executive function, well, kind of a brain of extremes, is going to struggle. When you're in a very supportive environment and you feel loved and not judged and encouraged, you're going to see our output probably more than anybody else because we're doing well and we're feeling seen and we're feeling energized. And so that environment, and you can help contain that, is going to make a big difference of what that looks like. So yeah, there's a lot of really incredible things about being, but just patience and learning us, and then advocating for what you need as well, is what I would say is going to be pretty significant. And then also just two more things that I want you to know is normal is that our energy level is going to fluctuate. So for 2 weeks, we might be on it doing all this stuff and then crash. And that is normal. Consistency is not a normal term because our dopamine can fluctuate depending on the seasons, depending on the days. It's that executive function. And so know that the consistency of the output of the executive function, it's normal to ebb and flow. And if we can actually rest, and you can encourage us to rest, we can be back the next day. If we beat ourselves up, which we're already doing, and then we get beat up from somebody else, we're going to be down longer. And so that's one thing. And then overstimulated. So a lot of people think they have anxiety when it can really be overstimulus. So we have a more sensitive nervous system. We're going to pick up on more data. We're going to pick up on more sounds. We're going to hear it. We're going to feel it in our body a lot more. The way our nervous system is adapted, we take in more stimulus. And so having time as an ADHD person to regulate, which might be time alone, is really important, to go shut off the lights and listen to music, or have time to go pursue our special interests and get in our own world and just unmask and kind of regulate and control all the stimulus. Like if we can control all the stimulus, our nervous system can relax. So that's a really normal thing as well, is to be able to do that. Thank you so much for being here. Have a wonderful week, and maybe Thanksgiving if you celebrate that. And yeah, we'll see you another time. Take care, everybody.